The grill hissed as steaks sizzled over open flames, smoke curling into the golden twilight above the barn. Country music thumped through the speakers, echoing off the surrounding hills as laughter rolled out from the crowd. Beneath rows of string, lights and bunting, folding chairs creaked under the weight of old friends and even older stories. The barn's wooden beams were wrapped in red, white, and blue streamers. A large sign hung just above the hayloft. 25 years of service. Thank you, Jake. Jake leaned against the barn door, amber drink in hand, letting the warmth of the evening settle into his bones. His wife, Sarah, waved at him from across the yard, a plate of food in her hand and a teasing smile on her face. It was the kind of evening that made you forget the weight of the years, the long shifts, the hard nights, the calls that came too late. Here, now, with the people who mattered most, he could finally breathe. And then, red and blue lights. They flickered across the barn wall, slow at first, then more insistently, washing the laughter in a sudden wave of tension. The music dimmed. Heads turned. A cruiser rolled up the gravel driveway like an uninvited ghost, its tires crunching in a rhythm that made Jake's stomach sink. Sarah hurried to his side. "What the hell is this?" "I don't know," Jake muttered. But deep down, he had a sinking suspicion, a suspicion with a name. The car door opened. A young officer stepped out, hand resting on his holster, face unreadable in the flashing lights. A second cruiser pulled in behind the first. From the shadows near the property line, a figure emerged. Clipboard, blazer, that sharp, bobbed haircut. Even at a distance, Jake could hear the condescension dripping from every word. "I told you. This was illegal," Karen shouted, marching forward like she owned the place. "This is a quiet neighborhood. You can't just host wild parties like some honky-tonk bar in the middle of suburbia." Jake stepped forward, arms out slightly. "Karen, this isn't your jurisdiction. I'm not part of the HOA. You know that. You're still disturbing the peace. I've had 3 neighbors call me tonight. Funny, I thought you were the only one peeking through a fence with binoculars." Her jaw clenched. She turned to the officer, lips tight. "He's got God knows how many people drinking, making noise, blaring music after sunset. You need to shut this down. This is dangerous." Jake took a deep breath. "Officer, this is a private party, retirement gathering. No minors, no violations. Everyone's parked on private land and we've kept the noise within reason." Karen cut him off. "He's lying. There are people carrying concealed weapons. I saw one man with a holster." "They're all retired officers," Sarah snapped. "This is a retirement party for my husband. You called the cops on cops." Karen's eyes didn't move from the officer. "I want this party disbanded. You have a duty to respond to a credible complaint. I'm the HOA chairwoman of—" "You're the chairwoman of a neighborhood this property isn't even in," Jake said calmly, but his voice carried enough edge to draw attention. "I don't care if he's a former officer or a circus clown. He's disturbing the peace and I have a right to call law enforcement." "You did," Jake said. "And here they are." The young officer stepped forward, finally speaking. "Sir, is there a problem here?" Jake held his gaze. "Not unless you see one. No laws broken, no disturbances. Everything here is above board." Behind him, one of the guests, gray-haired, tall, barrel-chested, wandered over. His badge was pinned to a shadow box on his chest, framed under the words, "Captain William Harrow, retired." The officer's eyes widened slightly. "Captain Harrow?" Harrow grinned. "Evening, son. Good to see you out here. Didn't expect backup at a barbecue." Karen's face twitched. "You know him?" The young officer hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. He ran the precinct until 3 years ago." Jake crossed his arms. "You called 911 on a retirement party for a decorated captain, 10 retired troopers, a dispatcher, and 1 police dog who, by the way, is asleep in the hayloft." The music started again behind them, softer this time, but steady. The people resumed talking, but eyes still flicked toward the confrontation. Karen's nostrils flared. "This is far from over," she hissed. "You think your badge gives you special rights? That you can live above the law out here just because you have land? I'll report this, I'll escalate it. Jake stepped forward. Karen, you've called the city on me 6 times this year. You complained about my mailbox being too rustic. You wrote a letter to the planning committee because I put up a flagpole. And now this? You're not above the rules. You don't make the rules here. She stared at him, eyes glinting. You'll regret this. I'll make sure the HOA revisits your zoning approval. That barn won't stay up for long. It was built legally, and again, not under your HOA. The officer turned to Karen. Ma'am, there's no reason to pursue this further. I'm going to file this as a non-issue. I'd recommend returning home. Karen didn't move. Her eyes burned holes through Jake's chest. This isn't the end, she said quietly. Jake gave her a small, tired smile. It never is with you. She spun on her heel and marched back toward her car, muttering something about dangerous men with guns and power trips. The second cruiser, having never left its vehicle, pulled out behind her, headlights sweeping across the barn one last time before vanishing into the night. Jake turned back toward the barn. The laughter was returning, the conversations easing, back to their rhythm. But a tension lingered in the air, thinner now but unmistakable. Sarah leaned into him. She's not going to let this go. No, Jake said. She won't. He looked out toward the edge of the field where Karen had parked just beyond the fence, the grass still flattened under her tires. That line, the invisible one she kept trying to cross, wasn't going to hold much longer. And maybe it was time someone pushed back. Jake drained the last of his drink, the ice clicking against glass, and walked into the barn as the lights glowed a little brighter. The young officer stood still, blinking under the soft pulse of the barn lights. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. Sir, he said, stepping toward Jake and giving a respectful nod. I had no idea this was your place. Jake nodded. Didn't expect to be hosting an uninvited police response tonight. The officer's smile widened. It's an honor to be here, even under unusual circumstances. From behind Jake, more of the guests had gathered, curious and cautious. A few were quietly amused, some less so. Among them was Harold Big H. Franklin, a retired lieutenant with a chest like a brick wall and a booming laugh that had once Jake in interrogation rooms. He walked forward, extending a hand to the officer. Kid, Harold said, you just tried to crash a state trooper reunion. You almost became a legend, for all the wrong reasons. The officer laughed nervously, shaking his hand. Wouldn't be the first time I walked into a mess because of a 911 call. From the darkness beyond the barn, Karen's voice came slicing through the air again. You're all acting like this is some kind of joke. Her heels clicked on the gravel as she marched back toward the gathering, arms crossed, face twisted. In righteous fury, she pointed at the officer. You're failing to do your job. This is an unlawful assembly. Jake stepped between her and the crowd. Karen, stop. No one here is breaking any laws. The officer already confirmed that. This isn't about your imaginary boundary lines, she snapped. I don't care if you think you're not in the HOA, this noise, this many people. It's a public safety issue. There's alcohol, firearms, God knows what else. Harold snorted. God knows what else is coleslaw and bad karaoke. That drew a few laughs, which only fueled Karen's rage. She glared at Harold like she wanted to physically erase him from the earth. Jake tried once more to keep things calm. Karen, you're creating a scene. Please go home. Not until... I've documented everything, she barked, holding up her phone and beginning to record. This is evidence. You're trespassing, Sarah said firmly, stepping up beside Jake. Get off our land. I am within public access, Karen shouted. I know my rights. But she was lying. The gravel road she stood on curved into Jake's property, well outside the HOA's boundary. She knew it, everyone did, but she was banking on fear. She always did. Karen turned her camera toward the crowd. Look at this. Guns. Alcohol. I bet they don't even have the proper permits for gatherings of this size. One of the troopers held up a bottle of soda. This illegal too, Karen? The officer sighed and stepped in front of her. Ma'am, unless you have proof of an actual crime, you need to leave. This is a private event. You're interfering with a lawful gathering." "I will not be silenced," Karen screamed. "I will go to the HOA board. I'll contact the city. I'll get the fire marshal out here tomorrow." "That's enough," Jake said, voice now sharp. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this. Every board member will hear about what happened tonight. You'll be cited, fined. That barn is going to be reevaluated, I promise you." Jake's expression didn't waver. "I built that barn 2 years ago, got the permits, got the clearance. Not under your HOA, not your jurisdiction." "Then we'll expand," she hissed. "We'll redraw the boundaries. I already have. Signatures. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war." Karen turned on her heel again and stormed back to her car. A moment later, her tires kicked up dust as she sped down the lane, taillights disappearing into the night. Silence fell over the barnyard like a heavy curtain. Jake exhaled slowly, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. Around him, the laughter returned in cautious waves. The guests dispersed, shaking their heads and muttering about power-tripping board ladies and how that woman needs a hobby. Sarah slipped her arm around his waist. "She's not going to stop." "I know," Jake said. "She's escalating. You heard her, redrawing boundaries. That's serious." "I know." He looked out over the crowd. His friends, former colleagues, people who'd stood with him through the worst days of his career. And now, some overzealous woman with a clipboard thought she could bully them into silence. No more. Jake turned to Harold. "You remember last spring when Karen came onto the property and measured our flagpole?" Harold chuckled. "Yeah. Claimed it violated aesthetic continuity. She trespassed then. And again tonight. And she's spreading lies." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Jake nodded. "I've been patient. Too patient. Time to push back?" Jake didn't smile. He simply said, "Time to be smart about it." Harold clapped, him on the back, grinning. "Good, because I've got a friend in civil law who lives for HOA nonsense." Sarah looked up at Jake, studying his face. "What are you planning?" "Nothing. Yet." He kissed her temple. "But I've got security footage and friends with good memories. You're not going to let her win, are you?" "No," he said. "Not this time." And with that, the barn doors swung open again. The music kicked up. Plates clattered. The smell of grilled ribs wafted back into the air. Laughter rose once more, hesitant at first, then fully returned. But Jake didn't join them right away. He stood near the edge of the property, staring into the dark where Karen had disappeared. The tire tracks still fresh in the gravel. He knew this wasn't over, but neither was he. The next morning arrived with a thick silence that felt unusually heavy for a Sunday. Jake sipped his coffee on the porch, eyes narrowed on a small group of cars parked near the end of the road. Not the usual neighbors. No friendly waves. Just tinted windows and men in polos talking with hushed urgency while pointing toward his property. Sarah stepped outside, wrapping her cardigan tighter. "They've been there for 20 minutes. Jake nodded, jaw tight. "HOA board members. Karen must have called an emergency meeting." "On a Sunday," she scoffed. "Of course she did." Jake watched them like a hunter might watch deer. Calm, patient, but ready. He walked to the end of his driveway just as two of the men broke off from the group and started toward him. One of them, slim build, slick hair, khakis too clean for fall yard work, extended a hand. "Morning. I'm Ted Hammond, Vice Chair of the Crestfall HOA. We were hoping to have a quick word." Jake didn't shake his hand. "I'm not part of Crestfall." Ted's smile faltered just for a moment. Right, but that's part of why we're here. You're just outside the current boundary lines. Karen has proposed a redistricting initiative. If approved by the board and ratified by a community, vote your property would fall under Crestfall jurisdiction." Jake's face didn't move. "You're trying to annex my land, not just yours," Ted said quickly. "There's a larger plan to consolidate and improve property value alignment. It's actually a great opportunity for you. Community standards, resources, long-term protection. Jake tilted his head. And if I say no? Ted kept smiling, but it looked more strained now. It's not really about saying yes or no. It's about the board and residents deciding what's best for the community as a whole. Jake took a step closer. You realize this is over a party, right? A lawful, peaceful party on land that's mine. This isn't about community. It's about Karen losing control. The other man, shorter, broader, older, cleared his throat. We're just here to make sure everything's civil. Jake let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he leaned in slightly. You go back and tell Karen this. Isn't overreach, it's trespass, and I've got the footage to prove it. Footage? Ted asked. Jake pointed to the corner of the barn. Security cameras, multiple angles, full audio. She stepped onto my land twice. She filmed my guests. Without consent. She made false claims to law enforcement. I'm already talking to a lawyer. Ted's smile finally broke. Let's not escalate this, okay? I'm sure we can come to some understanding. There won't be one, Jake interrupted. Not this time. They left shortly after, retreating to their cars like chess pieces returning to the board. But Jake didn't move. Not until the last one had driven off. By Monday morning, it had begun. He received 3 HOA violation letters, none of them legally binding, all of them laughably aggressive. One cited his barn as non-conforming architecture. Another accused him of unauthorized gatherings in a residential zone. The third warned of pending disciplinary review. Jake pinned all 3 to the corkboard in his garage, beside a timeline he had started to build. Dates, incidents, emails, even screenshots from neighborhood forums where Karen had been stirring up dissent. Harold came by that afternoon with a thumb drive and a grin. Footage from the party, he said. Front gate, barn, side pasture, all crystal clear. Karen's face looks like she swallowed a lemon. Jake plugged it into his laptop and watched. There it was, Karen shouting, pointing, threatening. The officer calmly asking her to leave. Her refusal. Her return. Her threats about redrawing. Property lines. I've got a friend in zoning, Harold said. He looked into the redistricting. Karen can't force it without a majority vote and municipal approval, which means she needs people mad, real mad. She's trying to build a case, Jake muttered. Make me the villain so she can rally the board. Harold crossed his arms. What are you thinking? Jake stared at the footage. Then at the 3 letters, then back at the footage. I'm thinking it's time to turn the spotlight around. He didn't move impulsively. He was smarter than that. He started by sharing a calm, respectful post on the neighborhood message board. Nothing aggressive, just facts, footage stills, a breakdown of the barn's permit history, a timeline of Karen's complaints, including the 911 call. He asked one question at the bottom of the post. Is this the leadership we want representing our neighborhood? It spread faster than wildfire. By Tuesday, 5 other neighbors had shared their own Karen stories. One family accused her of reporting their treehouse. Another claimed she tried to find them over a Halloween display. A third posted a photo of Karen inspecting their trash cans at night. Jake watched it unfold with a quiet satisfaction. On Wednesday, a local blogger picked up the story. When HOAs go too far, the retired troopers and the barn party bust. The article included footage clips, anonymous neighbor quotes, and a scathing editorial about the abuse of authority in suburban communities. Karen, for the first time in years, was losing control of the narrative. Jake wasn't gloating, not yet. But when he passed her on the road Thursday morning, she didn't wave, didn't even look. Her jaw was tight. Her hands gripped the steering wheel like she was strangling it. He knew that look. She was wounded. And wounded people either retreat or retaliate. Jake wasn't sure which way she'd go, but either way, he was ready. He closed his garage that night and looked out at the barn. The war had started, but it wasn't going to be fought with lawyers alone. It was going to be fought with truth, and Jake had plenty more where that came from. The next week passed in a blur of angry emails, back and forth debates on neighborhood forums, and legal consultations. Jake had expected the fight to grow. He hadn't anticipated how personal it would become. Karen had retaliated, of course. She'd hired a lawyer, a sharp one, and suddenly Jake's peaceful existence was embroiled in legal threats over zoning violations, property rights, and of course, the party. But something had shifted in the community. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down started speaking up one by one. They shared their stories, how Karen had harassed them, how she'd imposed unreasonable fines, how she'd made their lives miserable with petty complaints. Each new voice added weight to the growing tide of dissent. Jake had become their unlikely hero, the quiet, determined man who just wanted to live his life, not engage in petty suburban wars. He had no grand aspirations of being the neighborhood savior, but when it came down to it, someone had to stand up. By Friday morning, Jake received a letter. The Crestfall HOA was requesting an emergency board meeting, citing his unlawful gatherings as a major point of contention. A legal notice. It was time for the confrontation he'd been anticipating. He stepped outside, the fresh morning air sharp with the scent of pine. Sarah joined him on the porch, holding a coffee cup in both hands, her expression thoughtful. "You know this could escalate, right?" she asked. "I've already decided. It's time to confront her directly. We'll go to the meeting, we'll show up with the footage, and we'll take the fight to her." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling in. "Are you ready for what happens next?" "I've been ready for a while," Jake replied. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to rise. There was something in him now, a steady calm born from weeks of uncertainty, now giving way to purpose. He was no longer reacting to Karen's moves. He was dictating his own. That evening, they arrived at the Crestfall Community Center, a nondescript building that housed everything from HOA meetings to yoga classes. A small crowd was already gathered. Inside, board members, a few neighbors, and Karen standing at the front, her arms crossed with a stern expression. Jake could see it clearly now. Karen wasn't just someone trying to protect the community. She was a person who needed control, who craved the sense of power that came from making others bend to her will. It was evident in the way she carried herself, the tightness in her posture. This wasn't about rules for her. It was about ego. Ted Hammond, the HOA vice chair, called the meeting to order, his voice strained, like he was trying to hold the situation together before it collapsed. "We're gathered to discuss the ongoing issues related to the property owned by Jake Mitchell," he said, glancing briefly at the man in question before shifting his gaze to the board. Specifically, the unauthorized event held on his land, which has caused considerable disturbance in the neighborhood. Jake stood up then, his presence cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. He had prepared for this moment, and as the spotlight fell on him, he didn't hesitate. This isn't about a party. This is about a personal vendetta. This is about one person in this room. He pointed at Karen, who spent years trying to control everyone around her. A murmur ran through the crowd. Karen's eyes flashed, her face tightening with anger. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jake didn't give her the chance. He stepped forward, the energy in the room shifting. "I've got footage," Jake continued. "Footage from the event. Cameras on my property captured everything. Karen trespassing, making false claims to law enforcement, and even threatening guests. We can watch it together." A board member shifted uncomfortably in their seat, glancing at Ted, who looked like he wanted to shrink into his chair. But Jake was relentless. He clicked the button on his laptop, and the room fell into an eerie silence as the footage began to play. There she was, Karen striding onto Jake's property like she owned it. The confrontations, her insistence on making a scene, her attempts to escalate everything. Jake's voice from the video came through clearly. "Karen, stop. No one is breaking any laws. The officer already confirmed that." Karen's face on the screen twisted in rage, her words sharp as daggers. The officer standing beside her. The laughter of guests, the calm that had settled around the barn in stark contrast to Karen's shrill accusations. As the video ended, the room was completely still. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I have proof," Jake said, his voice steady. "Proof that this is not about the community. This is about power and control, about one person's obsession with dictating how others live. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one of the board members, the older woman who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. "I think we've seen enough." Her voice was firm but calm. This is not what we stand for in Crestfall. We are a community, not a battleground." Another board member spoke up, his voice wavering. I wasn't aware of the full extent of what's been happening. I thought this was just a neighborly dispute." Ted Hammond straightened in his chair, but even he couldn't summon the strength to defend Karen, not after the footage, not after the truth had been laid bare. Karen stood frozen, her face pale, the fight draining out of her like a balloon deflating. There were no more threats, no more posturing. Jake turned to the rest of the room. "This is what it comes down to. It's time to make the right call." For a long, drawn-out moment, the board deliberated in hushed tones, the weight of the decision hanging over them. But in the end, the vote was clear. They voted to dismiss the proposal for redistricting, to remove Karen's personal agenda from the agenda entirely. Karen's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Jake saw it. Defeat. But it wasn't just any defeat. It was the defeat of someone who had spent years thinking they were untouchable. And tonight, she had learned the hard way that no one was beyond reproach. As the meeting ended, Jake walked out into the parking lot, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Behind him, Sarah caught up, slipping her arm through his. "Did you think it would go this well?" she asked, her voice a mix of relief and pride. "No," Jake replied with a small smile. "But sometimes things fall into place when you stop letting someone control the narrative." And as they drove home, he knew this fight wasn't over. Not in the big picture. But tonight they'd won. The neighborhood was safe again, and so was he.